My name is Kabir.
Sleeve over her hand and pressed it to her mouth. The doors opened, and the scent of rain swept into the lobby. Her mother gave her hand a squeeze, a silent cue to keep walking. Sophie's sneakers squeaked against the polished floor. She couldn't help herself. She peeked again at Bruno. This time, his eyes found hers. It was only for a heartbeat, but in that heartbeat, something loosened in her chest. They entered the courtroom, the air inside warmer but heavier. The polished wood of the benches gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and somewhere in the corner, a ceiling fan turned with lazy rhythm. The judge, an older man with a lined face and tired eyes, sat at the bench, flipping through papers with the precision of someone who had done this for decades. The sound of pages shuffling was almost soothing, until the lawyers began speaking. It wasn't shouting, not yet, but their voices had an edge, the clipped tone of people who believed every second was a battle. Sophie felt the vibrations of those voices in the bench beneath her, the way a storm can be felt before it's seen. She shifted in her seat, curling her legs under her, wishing she could be anywhere else. From where she sat, she could see her father only in profile, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed straight ahead. He didn't look at her, though she wished he would. Her mother's grip remained firm, almost too firm, as if letting go might mean losing more than just the case. Sophie reached into the backpack at her feet. She pulled out a tin of crayons, the edges dented from use, and a folded sheet of paper that smelled faintly of the kitchen drawer it had been hiding in. She set them in her lap, the scratch of crayon against paper becoming her anchor, each stroke a way to block out the metallic taste in the air. She started with the ears, Bruno's ears, tall, proud, always listening. The rest came naturally, his steady gaze, the softness at the edges of his eyes, the way his fur looked like sunlight caught in smoke. And there, at his chest, the mark. A star-shaped patch of lighter fur she had noticed once before when his vest was off, though no one had mentioned it. She pressed the crayon harder for that detail, as if it mattered. The voices around her blurred into meaningless sound. Words like custody and financial stability meant nothing to her, and she didn't care to understand. She cared about getting Bruno's eyes just right, the deep brown that didn't judge or argue, only watched. The longer she drew, the smaller the courtroom felt, not because she was trapped, but because she had made herself a safe corner within it, a space only she and Bruno existed in. And yet, she could still feel the air shift. Every so often her mother's leg tensed beside her. Across the room, her father's hand flexed against his knee. The judge's brow furrowed deeper with each passing minute. Window. That's when it happened. A crayon, blue, rolled from her lap. It bounced once on the wood. Then clinked onto the floor, spinning in a lazy circle, before coming to rest near a pair of large sable paws. Bruno hadn't moved, but his head dipped slightly, eyes flicking to the crayon, then back to her. For a moment, it was as if they shared a private joke, the kind you don't tell anyone else. She slid off the bench, the hem of her sweater brushing her knees. Each step toward him felt like stepping out from behind a curtain. She stopped in front of him, small and unsure, holding the paper with both hands. "I made this," she whispered. though her voice was so quiet, it barely reached her own ears. Bruno didn't speak, of course, but his ears twitched, and he blinked slowly, the way dogs sometimes do when they trust you. Bruno placed the paper gently against his paw, as though giving him something sacred. From the corner of her eye, she saw the bailiff approach. His shoes clicked softly against the floor. He reached down, more out of habit than interest, until his gaze landed on the page. The change in his face was immediate. The easy neutrality hardened into something sharp, alert. His eyes flicked from the drawing to Bruno's vest, then back again. She didn't understand the look, but she recognized the stillness that followed. In that stillness, it felt as if the whole courtroom had shifted, just a fraction, but enough for anyone who was paying attention to notice. The words rose and fell like waves on a bad-weather shore. Too quick, too cold, always finding a way through the seams of the room. Sophie felt them in the wood of the bench, in the space between her shoulder blades, in the little drum of her pulse against her wrist. She shifted closer to the warmth of her mother's coat, then stopped. The thread carver, silver hair fixed in a neat twist, earrings like small meteors, spoke first. "Your Honor, our position remains that stability is paramount. My client has provided consistent housing and—" "Objection to characterization," Mr. Walsh interrupted, a man whose necktie looked like it had been tied in a moving car. "Officer Reed has documented schedules, community ties, and a support network through the department." The judge lifted a hand, not quite weary, not quite stern. "I'll hear both of you, one at a time." Sophie didn't look up. Stability was a word the adults used when they were trying to be kind while being unkind. It floated in the air, and then turned hard when it landed. She set brown aside, reached for black, and traced the softness at the corners of Bruno's eyes. Kind eyes, she thought. The sort that remember you even when you are pretending to be someone else. She hesitated, then shaded the vest. She knew its shape by heart, the snug fit, the seams that made a quiet grid across his chest. She'd seen it off of him once, at a barbecue behind the station, when he stood like a soldier and let 3 children, not including her, touch the thick fur that lay beneath. Her pencil fingers moved without looking, the strap, the buckle, the edge that followed the slope of his shoulder. A breath went long and thin in her lungs. Under the vest, right there, she left a space, not a mistake, a choice. The little star lived there, not sharp like a star in the sky, but a star drawn by a child, 5 points from a single line, a stitched constellation in pale fur where darker fur should be. She pressed the white crayon until it almost squeaked, and where white could not show, she made the space around it darker to let it rise. It felt important that it rise. "Primary residence," Miss Carver said. "Educational continuity. Healthcare." Each word like a bead clicked onto a wire. "Dad makes pancakes on Sundays," Sophie whispered, not out loud, not even on purpose. Her hand steadied. She warmed Bruno's gaze with a lighter brown, then tipped a bit of gold at the edge, the way his eyes sometimes carried the sun indoors. If she made his eyes right, she could breathe. Mr. Walsh's voice came low but tight. "With respect, Your Honor, we're not trading invoices. We're talking about a 6-year-old who does better with routine, and with a caregiver who understands the demands of her schedule," Miss Carver cut in. "Yes, which we have provided, which we will continue to provide." A paper slid, a chair creaked, someone sighed, the walls leaned closer. It was not noise so much as pressure. Sophie worked faster at the outline of Bruno's muzzle, softened the fur above his cheeks, then set the black aside and reached for gray. The gray, something in her stomach loosened. This was the part where the world got quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat. She drew the pads of his paws, big, careful pads that could tread loud when they needed to, but usually chose not to. She added the faint shine at the edge of his nose. She wrote his name very small at the corner. Then traced it again, because the first try looked shy. Bruno. A memory brushed her shoulder like a curtain. The scent of wet earth, a faraway door, the hush of someone else's breathing when you don't want them to know you're awake. It didn't belong to this room, and she didn't invite it. But sometimes memories didn't ask permission. Her hand made a light rectangle behind Bruno. Barely anything. Just a suggestion of a wall. And a tiny square higher than the rest of the picture, she put a smudge of pale at its edge. Moonlight. Or maybe a different kind of light you remember when your eyes are closed. "Finances," Ms. Carver said. "Character," Mr. Walsh replied, crisp as a folded flag. "Your Honor," Ms. Carver again, "there are concerns about Officer Reed's hours." "Officer Reed's hours," Mr. Walsh echoed, "come with a village of trained adults and a dog whose very presence calms this child. Dog calms." The words brushed her like a warm hand between her shoulder blades. She glanced up just once and found Bruno across the aisle. He wasn't watching her exactly. He was watching all of it. And yet, the feeling she got was that he was keeping count of her breaths, so she didn't have to. She returned to the drawing and gave him a little more light in his eyes. Sophie reached for red, but the red was blunt, a round-nosed soldier refusing to make a clean line. She watched it wobble in her fingers, then set it down. She didn't need red, not for this part. She chose blue for the background, a soft wash along the bottom edge, the way floors look in big rooms with shiny surfaces. She shaded carefully, keeping her strokes in one direction, because chaos lived in back and forth. Her mother's leg vibrated with a tiny tremor, knee bouncing under the table of grown-up talk, and Sophie braced the paper with her palm. The judge spoke in that tone adults use when they want everyone to be reasonable. "I am not interested in fault-finding. I am interested in what keeps this child whole." His gaze, when it drifted to Sophie, was not unkind. It made her want to sit taller. Whole, she thought. The word landed softly. A dog's paw. Rights, consistency, obligations. And it felt to Sophie like being in a hallway with too many doors, all of them slamming at once. She lowered her head until her hair fell forward and made a curtain. Inside the curtain, there was Bruno. The way he made space around himself, the way that space seemed to include her. She signed the bottom in the crooked letters she saved for things that mattered. S-O-P-H-I-E. Then she leaned back, the paper warming under her hands. For a moment, she did nothing at all. She just breathed and listened to the soft, secret sound of wax settling into paper. Voices collided. "Your Honor, if I may, objection!" And the judge's gavel met the wood with a single, tired rap. The room fell into a quieter shape. Sophie glanced down at the blue crayon resting near her knee, the one she had left uncapped for the sea, she might add later. It quivered on the slope of her sweater, a small boat daring the edge. She held the drawing a little closer to her chest, as if a warm dog might feel it through the paper. In her mind, Bruno blinked once, slow, steady, and the room got big enough to hold her again. The blue crayon had been riding the slow slope of Sophie's knee for a while, a timid boat, nosing toward open water. When the judge's gavel tapped once to steady the lawyers, the crayon slipped free. It rolled across the worn bench, then hopped to the floor with a soft click, spinning a small circle that seemed far too bright for the room. It came to rest against a sable paw. Bruno didn't move at first. He only lowered his head, the way he did when listening to the part of a room most people missed. The crayon touched the edge of one pad, a tiny blue flag against weathered leather. His ears made a small, attentive adjustment. Sophie felt that adjustment, as if someone had eased a hand between her shoulder blades. Her mother's fingers, which had been busy twisting a tissue into tight white rope, paused. Mr. Walsh shuffled a document. Miss Carver re-moistened her lips, already preparing the next polished sentence. None of them noticed the crayon. But Sophie did. And Bruno did. She slid from the bench with the carefulness of someone trying not to wake a sleeping house. The paper was warm where she had held it to her chest. She cradled it with both hands, edges pinched between thumb and forefinger so it wouldn't bend. Her shoes whispered on the floor as she crossed the wide aisle. 2, 3, 4 steps, until she was close enough to see the dark map of Bruno's whiskers and the soft seam where fur gave way to the smooth bridge of his nose. He looked at her the way he always did, steady and without hurry. A dog who understood that coming closer is sometimes its own kind of courage. Sophie glanced up at her father's profile, stone still, at her mother, knelt. The posture felt familiar, like a memory learned by muscle, knees on the cold paper cupped like a secret. "I made this," she whispered, though her voice hardly disturbed the space between them. She tilted the drawing so Bruno could see. On the page he existed twice. The first Bruno, drawn in careful browns and patient blacks, watched with kind eyes. The second Bruno lived in the white star at his chest, 5 child-made points lifted from the paper because she had pressed the surrounding shades darker to give it breath. Around him she had scribbled the hint of a wall, a small high square with a lick of pale at its edge, moonlight, or the memory of it. Bruno's head lowered the smallest amount. A soldier's nod softened into a friend's acknowledgement. His breath washed warm across the paper, stirring a loose strand of Sophie's hair. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, and in that brief, sweet dark she remembered another kind of dark, colder, deeper, where breath had been the only measure of time and a dog's presence had been the only proof the world hadn't ended. "Thank you," she said, still quiet, the words more exhale than sound, then even softer the rest, "for finding me in the dark." The words disappeared into the space between them, where only the dog could keep them. Bruno's ear twitched. His tail didn't thump or sweep. It made a small, almost imperceptible shift, as if to say, "I heard you. I heard you then. I hear you now." The bailiff had been pacing the boundaries of the room with the practiced boredom of a man whose job was to notice what no one else did. He saw the girl kneel, He saw the dog lower his head in that not-quite-pet posture that meant something was being said in a language made of breath and stillness. He approached not out of suspicion, but out of duty, the way a lighthouse turns because turning is what it does. "You all right there, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice pitched to that friendly register men use in churches and libraries. Sophie looked up and nodded. The paper tilted and caught the overhead light, brightening the white star at Bruno's chest. The bailiff followed that light with his eyes, idly at first, then with a narrowing focus that tightened the skin around his mouth. He bent, palm open. "May I?" Sophie hesitated. Adults had been taking things from each other all morning: time, patience, the benefit of the doubt. But the bailiff's hand waited in the air, not insistent, not greedy, just offered. She slid the paper onto it like a plate she didn't want to spill. He steadied the bottom edge with his other hand and lifted the drawing to chest height. For a second or two, he was merely polite. Then the picture resolved. He saw the dog, sure, everyone saw the dog, but he also saw what Sophie had drawn beyond the dog, the faint rectangle of a wall, the little high window. There, on the dog's chest, the star, exact, unmissable. The color left his face in stages, as if a shadow were walking across him. First the cheeks, then a lips. His jaw worked once, empty of words. He cut a quick glance to Bruno, to the vest that covered exactly the place where the star would be, then back to the page where it showed in unblinking white. A memory, his own, stirred. A debrief 2-3 winters ago. A grainy photograph, a description shared in a room where doors were shut and names were not repeated. The mark, a star. The window, small and high. The toolbox, red. Things the public had never been given. He straightened, but only halfway, as if the paper had become heavy. The courtroom sounds drained down to a hum. Ms. Carver's voice faltered mid-syllable. Mr. Walsh, seeing the bailiff's posture, stopped tapping his pen. Daniel turned fully for the first time, the movement of a man who understands the quiet before a storm. His eyes found the drawing, then his daughter's face, then Bruno's unwavering stillness. His hands flexed against his knees, a flash of worry followed by a steadier thing. Resolve, maybe, or a kind of recognition. Sophie's mother reached for her without standing, fingers open in a reflex both protective and uncertain. The gesture hovered there, a bridge not yet crossed. The judge watched all of it, the way an old tree watches a field change color in a single wind. His pen met the pad and wrote nothing. He did not ask a question, not yet. There is a wisdom to timing that some jobs teach you whether you want it or not. The bailiff looked at the drawing again, and when he spoke, the sound came out careful, like a man carrying water. "Judge," he said, not loud. It was not even a call, really, more a note in the room's chord. Judge Matthews lifted his gaze, inquiry in his brows. The bailiff didn't move toward the bench. He couldn't seem to, not with the paper in his hands, and the dog's steady eyes on him, and the child kneeling at the dog's side. He swallowed, the tendons at his throat flexed like ropes taking strain. "Sir," he tried again, and this time the word held a shape the judge recognized. Urgency wrapped in restraint. Sophie rose from her knees, hands empty now, feeling suddenly light and a little cold. Bruno leaned, not much, just enough that his shoulder brushed her sleeve. The contact was the quietest promise, "I'm here." Across the aisle, Daniel's mouth formed her name, not speaking it, only holding it. His gaze flicked to the paper, then to the judge, then back to his daughter. Something old and careful in him, training, instinct, aligned with something older. A father's need to gather his child close and make a circle a fraction higher, as if to test whether his hands would obey him. They did. He looked from the page to the bench and back again. When he finally moved, it was only a step, small but decisive, the kind of step that makes the room decide what it is going to be next. His face, still pale, told the rest of the story, the part he hadn't found words for yet. It told it to the judge who sat forward. It told it to Daniel, whose spine straightened despite himself. It told it to Ms. Carver and Mr. Walsh, who lowered their weapons of paper and posture because something larger than winning had entered the room. And it told it, without saying a single thing, to the dog, who already knew. Bruno's ears tipped forward. The star on the paper seemed to glow. The bailiff drew a breath that was almost a prayer. Then he turned toward the bench, the page held flat and careful, as if he carried not a drawing but a door. The bailiff didn't so much climb the steps as drift up them, holding the paper flat in both palms. Judge Matthews waited with his pen poised over a page of tidy notes. Without a word, he took the paper. First he looked over his glasses, his habit when he wanted the whole before the parts. A dog, drawn with affection, colors pressed patiently. Then he looked through the lenses and felt something shift. Bruno stared back from the page, his gaze so steady it was like having the dog twice in the room. The vest was rendered with surprising accuracy, but what stopped him was what lay bare. A pale child's drawn star at the center of the chest. He had seen that scar once, in a photograph slid to him at 2 a.m. during a case that had collapsed for lack of one small human piece. In that basement, a narrow window, a red toolbox, a length of chain. The K9 had been called Bruno. Beneath the star in the drawing, the child had included the room, walls too close, the high square of a window, the red toolbox colored stubbornly, the chain drawn in repeating ovals. From the corner of his eye, he saw the artist, a small girl named Sophie, knees tented under her sweater, eyes fixed on the real Bruno across the aisle. "Bailiff," Matthew said, "hold a moment." The red toolbox, the chain, the window, all details from an affidavit he had signed on a snowy night 3 years ago. A warrant that sent officers to an outbuilding, down swollen stairs, to a basement where Bruno had paused, then led them to a child. The suspect had fled. The scene was swept. The case never stood. The only things left were a chain, a toolbox, a window, and a scar shaped like a star. Those details had stayed sealed, known only to a handful, and now they lived in crayon. He glanced at Sophie. She leaned toward the dog, as if distance were intolerable. Folders, like shields. Something more than custody may be before us. He let the words hang, then recessed the court for 5 minutes. When the gallery settled, he looked at Sophie. "Miss Sophie, may I ask you a few questions about your picture?" She nodded. "You drew Bruno," he said. "Very well." "He's easier than people," she murmured. "He doesn't talk loud. And behind him a room. Could you tell me about it?" "It's small, colder than here. The floor smells like when Daddy fixes the mower, oil but wet." She pointed at the high square. "A window, you have to look up, sometimes a stripe of light. And this," he gestured to the red block. "A toolbox. He liked things lined up, got mad if they weren't. The chains were heavy. He said they were just for fixing things." The judge's voice stayed soft. "Earlier you gave your picture to Bruno. What did you tell him?" She kept her eyes on the dog. "That's the place Bruno found me." The words struck like a bell. "I was there," she added, touching her chest. "I didn't talk. But Bruno came to the door and didn't rush in. He just breathed, like waves. 1, 2, and I could hear mine find his. I put my hand where the star is. I thought if I touched it I could come with him." He waited. The man upstairs was gone, but it was still loud inside. She paused. Then, "I remember the box, the chains, the little window, and Bruno's collar. It made a tiny bell sound in a glove." Her mother covered her mouth. "Does it feel safe to have Bruno closer?" the judge asked. She nodded. "Officer Reed, bring him here." Bruno crossed the aisle and sat by the bench, chest facing Sophie. She leaned forward, and the dog leaned a fraction in return. "You're very brave," Matthews said. "What you share can help keep you and other children safe." "I don't like the dark," Sophie said. "But Bruno is brave in the dark, so I can be brave if he's near. And the window, sometimes the moon looked like a cut apple. I counted to it to make time move, until Bruno came." The judge bowed his head once. The details, window, toolbox, chains, star, aligned with what he had kept hidden for 3 years. Evidence in crayon, confirmed by a child's memory. It was enough. "We're going to pause these proceedings," he told the court. "Bailiff, secure the exhibit. Officer Reed, stay with your partner. No one speaks to the child unless I say so." Then to Sophie, "We'll keep you with Bruno for a while, all right?" "Yes," she breathed. "Thank you for telling me." Her shoulders eased. Bruno exhaled. The judge tapped the gavel once, a sound the room accepted in silence, because sometimes silence is the only proper answer to a child who has told the truth. The recess ended with the quiet shuffle of shoes and low voices. The drawing now rested in a clear sleeve on the bench, the white star on Bruno's chest muted but unmistakable. The bailiff stood by the rail. Bruno sat where the judge had placed him, angled so Sophie could see him without leaning, ears steady, breath calm. Daniel's hands tightened and released on his knees. Across the aisle, his ex-wife's eyes moved between the judge, their daughter, and the drawing, confusion flickering like passing weather. Judge Matthews leaned forward. "Miss Sophie, I'd like to ask a few more questions. If you want to stop, say so." She nodded, one hand hidden in her sleeve, the other flat on the bench. Her eyes went to Bruno before she spoke. "Sometimes," she said, "I remember pieces, at night when it rains, or when the mower starts. The dark place comes in a dream, not a story, just waiting." "What's it like?" "It smells like cold dirt and oil. There's a door that breathes. Footsteps upstairs make dust fall. I count the dust in the moon stripe from the window." She traced a line in the air. "And what helps?" "Bruno," she said. "He doesn't make the dark go away. He makes a space in it. When the bad man was near, my heart went with his. The bad man can't hear feet that walk together." The line landed soft but unshakable. Daniel kept his gaze on the dog, gratitude and old grief braided in his chest. "Do you remember the man's voice?" the judge asked. She flinched, then steadied as Bruno shifted. "Like the fridge humming, but with words. He didn't yell, except when the toolbox was wrong. I don't like to remember his shoes. They had edges. They made the floor wet." Her mother's voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't know which words," Sophie said. "They lived in the dark place. Bruno brought some of them back." "Do the dreams come every night?" "Not when he sleeps by my door. Even far away I can feel it. I touch the place where the star is and tell it to shine." Bruno exhaled, and Sophie's shoulders eased. Matthews nodded. "Special helpers will talk with you later in a smaller room. Bruno can be with you." She looked at the drawing. "Can he keep it?" "If he had pockets, yes. I'll keep it safe for both of you." The bailiff gave a subtle signal. Matthews recessed again. In the hall, Bailiff Hank Delaney stepped into a stairwell and called Agent Park at the FBI. He gave her the details. Bruno, the hidden star, the high narrow window, red toolbox, chains laid out. Sophie's words. "That's the place Bruno found me." Park's voice dropped. "Those match restricted points from a 3-year-old cold case. No leaks. I need you to hold the room until I call the judge in chambers. 5 minutes. Delaney returned to the bench. "Sir, FBI confirms details match an active case tied to Bruno's search 3 winters back. Agent Park and an winter raid, basement, narrow window, red toolbox, unusual chain, the scar." Whitaker, the AUSA, requested. Suspend custody hearing, seal the record, protect the drawing, arrange a forensic interview with Bruno present, and issue protective orders. Both attorneys agreed to protect the child. Matthews ordered, custody case suspended, record sealed, guardian ad litem appointed, protective order on all details, drawing held under seal until FBI evidence tech arrives. He ended with, our first duty is to the child's safety and the truth. We walk at her pace. Back on the bench, he told the courtroom, the custody matter is suspended, pending a coordinated criminal investigation. No one leaves without my leave. Then to Sophie, we'll go slowly. Bruno will stay where you can see him. Her shoulders loosened. Bruno's ears tipped forward. The room shifted onto its new rails. Outside, the rain softened against the glass. Inside, a case thought closed had opened its mouth again. The rain started soft and turned mean, flattening the woods into wet bark and breathing earth. Wind slashed crosswise. Tracks filled as soon as they were made. It was a night that told sensible people to go inside. Bruno didn't. He was younger then, lean at the hips, all spring and purpose. The tracking harness fit like it had been built on his shoulders, the long line paid out from Officer Daniel Reed's glove in a slick ribbon. Their breathing matched the work, quiet, even, broken only by gear clicks and the scrape of boot and paw in the mud. They'd pulled scent from a shirt in the missing child's laundry, cotton still warm, a ghost with a name. Daniel let Bruno bury his muzzle, then drew it back. That's her, ears forward. Command given. Find. The line went live. Rain breaks scent like surf wreck's handwriting. Bruno worked the edges, nose low, then lifted into the wind. Half circles when the path dissolved. Daniel watched the fine changes, tail angle, the shoulders that meant the trail had pooled, jumped, dropped. Easy, he said when the dog surged. Good. Check it. The line tightened again. Detective Marine followed with 2 uniforms and a dying light. We're losing time, he said once, careful not to step on the dog's work. Daniel didn't answer. Time would be what the dog said it was. They slid under a rotted cattle fence, snagging on blackberry thorns. At a mossed stump, Bruno stopped, circled tight, chose south. In cedar shade, the ground held old damp. He shortened his stride, searching not just forward but down into the years, found a clean thread and stitched it to the next. Half a mile later.
This is where things get absolutely messy. So let me break down this confusing web of relationships, because even I had to rewind this part. Vanessa has 2 kids, a 12-year-old and 14-year-old. She claims they live with both her and their father, William Bledworth. But then the plot thickens when the police report mentions Nick Sarabia as her boyfriend. Now watch this carefully. First, she tries to pass off Nick Sarabia as the children's father, but when pressed, she admits he's actually just her boyfriend and not the father of her kids. Classic deflection tactic that completely backfires. The judge is keeping track of every single contradiction, and you can feel the tension building. Here's what's really happening. Vanessa is trying to minimize her relationship with Sarabia because she knows he's her co-defendant in this firearm theft case. She's hoping the judge won't connect the dots, but this judge has what she calls a steel trap for a mind. Big mistake, Vanessa.
Before sunrise, a red-coated reporter said, "Miracle in the woods." They filmed the dog by the building because the dog was public and the truth was not. Daniel turned when he could and stared when he had to. They didn't see the star. They didn't see the stripe of light. Chapter 70s. Dogrigen, Transonim. He wrote it like weather. He meant it like a map. Chapter 70. Stretch U.S. Daniel sleep. And rubbed on. Kel heaven. An addendum. No one read. On the evening news, Daniel wrote, canine abrasion at sternum. Vest removed for cleaning. Daniel rinsed the harness. Water ran brown too long. He mount the trialed coath, and sleepy. Tanine. Rinsed in a holly. Water ran brown too long. He meant to stop in the kitchen, the way long nights usually end. Dog on tile. Handler against a cabinet. Boots off. Reports in his head. Bodies do, when they remember a simple truth. I am not alone. To Daniel it read as instinct, a good dog refusing to punch out until the smallest person in his pack was accounted for. He thought of the girl in the basement, Jane Doe on paper, not in his chest, reaching for the same place on the same dog. He told himself he was drawing patterns with tired hands. He told himself that so he could breathe. Her hand drifted away like a leaf letting go. Bruno laid his head down, eyes on her. Daniel's fingers found the ruff behind his ear. Good work, he said, meaning every inch. When he could stand, he did. He finished cold tea because promises matter. He spread another towel where he knew Bruno would choose to sleep, halfway between the hall and the back door, holding the world and the child in one soft gaze. Bruno ignored the towel and returned to the threshold. On the counter, Daniel opened his notebook and wrote a line that would look like nothing later. K9 remained alert until daughter asleep. Chose door. Contact at sternum, calmed child. He wrote it like weather, not knowing he'd drawn a constellation he'd navigate by 3 years later. By dawn, the storm had thinned. Radios hissed themselves empty. A state trooper stood in a slicker and watched taillights come and go. They had a cup still ghosting heat. A chair slid back at an upstairs table. Rainwater in footprints. Diesel in the air. They had the room. The high, narrow window. The red toolbox. Chain laid in ovals. The breathing door. They had photographs. A medic's notes. A handler's report written plain. They had a girl wrapped in a blanket that told the truth. Someone had covered her, but not with kindness. Protocol wanted straight lines. Scene secured, warrant widened, techs in suits, chain of custody tight as a fist. Storms pull on leashes. A generator coughed. A door wouldn't take a seal. Memory got wet. Lawyers arrived in rain-beaded sedans, saying, within law, with the patience of expensive men. Paperwork put up fences nobody could climb. When they returned with daylight, the room was not itself. The toolbox was gone. The chain was gone. Bleach and citrus burned through the oil smell. Fresh paint shone a bad lie. The little window had been boarded and unboarded. New screws glittered. The drain cover wore a different pattern. You didn't need a badge to see someone with a key, and a timetable had come to pray their kind of prayer. Prints gave nothing back. Boot impressions turned into arguments between wind and water. A neighbor remembered a truck with one headlight, or maybe two. Another heard a generator cut twice or once. People always remember more after you ask. The bridge. Insufficient, the foreman said, looking sorry in a way that didn't help. The judge signed the orders that made the file quiet, hating the necessity more than the act. In pencil on his own copy, he wrote himself a private instruction: hold the specifics back. The star, the toolbox, the window, save them. You'll need them when truth knocks. At Daniel's house, knights formed around a doorway. Bruno took the hall without being asked, a long, patient shape between a child and the world. Sometimes in sleep, Sophie's hand would rise and find the place under the vest that was not there, and rest on a star she couldn't see. Her breathing took the dog's count. Daniel didn't draw the conclusions his job wouldn't allow. He made tea and watched them keep what they kept. Unanswered questions learned the furniture. The property changed hands. The shell shed its skin and took another bland name. Photographs yellowed by a degree the camera couldn't explain. The dog's star did not fade, and the memory of a small hand finding it did not either. Some mornings Daniel could hear a basement door breathe when there was no door, only his kettle complaining at a boil. The case did what unsolved cases do, kept its shape in a drawer, its teeth in the people who wouldn't stop opening it. In an addendum most readers skimmed, a line waited, visible depigmentation, star, contact, calmed child. The smallest star in the file, and enough to steer by when a blue crayon, years later, rolled to a sable paw, and the whole map snapped back into place. The room asked nothing when you entered. A cloth-shaded lamp pooled warm light on a low table. Paper stars drooped in one corner. A wooden farm set waited with its gates open. Orange peel and clean wool in the air. Bruno lay where rug met hardwood, forepaws crossed, head up, eyes on the smallest person. Daniel waited just outside, close enough for Sophie to feel, far enough not to crowd the words. The judge's orders and the guardian ad litem's nod had brought them here. The room did the rest. "Hi, Sophie," the woman said, kneeling until they were eye to eye. "I'm Elisa. We go at your pace. Draw, play, or quiet. Your choice. Is Bruno okay to stay?" Sophie looked at the dog, then back. "He likes soft floors." "Me too," Elisa said, sitting cross-legged. She set a tin of used crayons on the table and a shallow sand tray with a few wooden figures. "Sometimes pictures talk, so voices don't have to work so hard." Sophie slid to the rug, sleeves over her knuckles. Bruno's collar gave a small, polite chime. Elisa, who'd introduced herself without listening. Then the slope of his head, the soft smudge of eyes. Buckle, strap. Where the vest ended, she left a small opening, as if the paper needed to breathe there. Elisa didn't name it. "You've noticed him a lot," she said, admiring, not grading. A tiny, almost yes. "Anything behind Bruno?" Elisa asked later. "Maybe a place he likes?" "Not yet," Sophie said, flicking a look toward the dog. "Okay," Elisa said easily, sliding a second page forward. "Sometimes hands remember what mouths don't want to carry. Today, your hands can go first. If a picture gets too loud, we push it away." Sophie reached for black, hesitated, took gray, and darkened it as she went, rectangles, long ovals, hatch marks along the bottoms. "They look like something that makes big sounds on floors," Elisa said softly. "Boots," Sophie whispered. "What do the boots do?" "They walk. They drip. They leave dark. The stripe of light sees them. They don't care." Bruno lifted his head a notch. His breath set a rhythm in the room. "Do you want to draw where the stripe comes from?" Elisa asked. Sophie used white and shaded around a small, high rectangle so the light could exist. Then she took the little wooden door, set it halfway down the sand tray's left edge, pressed a groove beneath it. "Heavy," she said. "It sticks. It talks." She hummed the swollen wood sound. Elisa nodded. "I hear it." On paper, Sophie colored a fierce red rectangle. She didn't draw a handle. She didn't need to. That one has weight, Elisa said. He liked things lined up, Sophie replied, laying patient ovals beside the red block. Bruno's tag kissed its ring again. Sophie's shoulders softened. She reached, paused, looked at Elisa. You can, Elisa said. He keeps secrets. Sophie set her palm where the vest ended. Bruno met her halfway and lowered his head. Elisa waited until the hand returned. Thank you, she said, as to a gift. She brought out a small tray of brown bottles. Want a guessing game? We smell. You tell me what they feel like. Or we put them away. Wary became curious. Sophie nodded. Cinnamon. Christmas. Grass. Soccer. A third, uncapped gently. Sophie leaned back, not fear so much as tightness. The mower, she said, but wet. And
Keep its promise.
you knew where to touch, Elisa said. He waited, Sophie said. He didn't pull, he waited. Elisa let her eyes wet and didn't apologize. That's good work. Sophie pressed the little wooden door deeper into its groove. He wasn't there later, she said, meaning the man, but it was still loud. Is it loud now? Sophie set her palm on Bruno's chest. Less. Then we did today right, Elisa said. A small clock lifted a polite bird of sound. No one chased it. Elisa stacked drawings gently. They can stay safe here or you can decide later. No need to choose now. Can Bruno keep them? Sophie asked, shy now that the hard part had passed. He's very good at keeping, Elisa said. We'll keep them with him. Can I come again? Sophie asked. As many times as you need, Elisa said. They learned the room the way sailors learn a harbor. Different tides, same lights. Lamp low, paper stars steady, sand tray smoothed to a quiet lake. Daniel a calm shape in the hall. Bruno halfway between crayons and exit, chest to Sophie, chin ready for the easy lift that says, I'm here. On day one, all they did was breathe. Bruno's exhale, the soft bell, a small palm finding fur. On day two, routine wrote itself. Sophie arrived with a crayon tin tucked like a trusted book. Bruno gave Daniel one look and folded onto the rug. We'll start where it's quiet, Elisa would say. Sophie's hand found the place where the vest ended. Only then did words come. They don't bump into each other as much if I'm touching him, she said once, surprised at her fingers. The words. He's a good doc, Elisa said. Words can tie up and rest. Sometimes the words were weather, boots. Sometimes they bent in the middle. He liked the toolbox straight, Sophie said, pressing red until the wax ridged. The crayon snapped. Bruno's ear flicked. Sophie startled, then steadied when her palm returned to fur. They invented a signal. Sophie lifted her hand and opened it slowly, light for a moth, and lowered it to her knee. This, she said, and anchor. Elisa smiled. Anchor doesn't boss the water, it holds. Sophie tried it. Bruno adjusted gravity shoulder to shin. She didn't need to see the star. Anchor, she whispered. The room grew edges again. There were setbacks. A hallway scrape turned Sophie to glass. Bruno didn't crowd. He laid his head against her shin, a small weight that changed the room's balance. It's okay, she told him, giving and receiving. We heard it together. Another day she came pale and silent, coat on. Elisa handed her a soft brush. He gets extra handsome if you brush him. Stroke in sand and pressed 2 oval boot prints beyond the fence. They learned what broke the spell. A well-meaning intern's head in the doorway. Corrected kindly. They learned order, star before door. On rain days, Sophie drew the heavy door without pressing grooves into the paper. On a Sunday, she described mower but wet without the bottle. Another day she added a small hook on the door's back, new, precise, frightening and proud. By week 3, Sophie's chin rode a notch higher. Bruno settled faster. In some drawings the door still stuck, in others a second page showed the handle turned, the light stripe wider. "We can leave it like that," Elisa would say, and they would. At session's end, Sophie crunched the crayon lid shut, lifted her palm for anchor, then chose to walk to the door without it. Bruno rose and matched her, not a march, a mirroring. "How is the water?" Daniel would ask in code. Sophie would glance at Bruno. "Good, Doc," she'd say, relieved to let the dog be the doc today. The work didn't cure anything. It taught carrying. Sophie learned some doors make noise, and some noise can be endured. A stripe of light isn't a promise, but it's a direction. A dog's patience can hold fear without turning it into a speech. When the past arrived fast and certain, she did what sailors do in sudden weather, found her anchor, and held until the water remembered the shore. One afternoon had the hush of a library before rain. "We'll start where it's quiet," Elisa said. Sophie touched the air in front of Bruno. "Anchor," she whispered, and his shoulder found her shin. She chose gray for floor, brown for ear, always the ear, vest, the tiny opening where the star could live if needed. She left that space uncolored, a pocket of light. "I can smell the mower," she breathed. "But wet. Not outside wet. Inside wet." Elisa nodded. "I hear you." Sophie drew the narrow window in white, shading around it. Her hand hovered, then, surprising herself, reached for black. She drew a hand, knuckles, tendon, quick hatches of pale hair. She made the thumb too thick, pressed harder, as if thickness mattered. Around the index finger she traced an oval and filled it, heavy, deliberate. A ring. Bruno's ear flicked. The bell stayed silent. He breathed out. Sophie matched him. Her hand didn't leave the page. "Tell me about the ring?" Elisa asked. Voice steady. "It was cold," Sophie said, "even in the warm part." She looked.
Child drew 2 antlers like branches, 3 small stars above the brow, a thin rim around, a nick on one side where light would catch. "He wore it always," she said, like stating gravity, "in the stripe by the toolbox. When he made the oval straight, when he turned the key." She tapped the band. It clicked on metal, not Bruno's bell. Sharp, a dot where band met face, ink, oil, something stained. "Right here." And he turned it when he left, the picture into his palm, only when he left. "That's new," Elisa said, same tone she used for hooks and screws. "Thank you." Sophie took her hand from Bruno, pressed it to her own chest, testing if the star could glow without touch. "My stomach goes fast when I say the sentence," she admitted. "But the ring is not loud. It just sits." "Draw it bigger," Elisa offered, "so we can see the quiet parts." Sophie drew it again, closer now. Stag clear, 3 stars above, thin border, a tiny crack on the left edge. "Not shiny, shiny," she said. "Old shiny." Elisa stored the phrase, old shiny, something an investigator could hold without cutting the child. "Do you want to leave the sentence here when you go?" Elisa asked. "We can write it and close the paper and put it on the shelf. It will still be true. It will live here for now." "Can Bruno keep it?" Sophie asked, earnest and hopeful. "The sentence?" "Yes," Elisa said simply. "He's very good at keeping." Sophie slid the drawing toward Bruno like a note. He didn't sniff or paw. He stayed. Steadiness received. Elisa tucked the pages into a plain folder on the lowest shelf beside the sand tray. "Safe," she said. "No ceremony." "If the bad sentence tries to follow me," Sophie said, almost smiling at her own courage, "it has to go past Bruno." "It does," Elisa agreed, "and Bruno is polite, but he's a wall." They sat in the quiet. A small fern behind Elisa kept making green. Sophie lifted her palm and opened it, moth-light, then lowered it. "Anchor," she said, playful now. Bruno's ear completed the answer. Elisa saved her notes for last, then wrote them neat. Spontaneous recall. "You're mine until I say so."
I am. However, when I want to do unspoken, affect tremor regulated with canine contact. Novel detail, signet ring, oval face, emblem, stag under 3 stars, nick on band, old shiny, ring turned face in when leaving, faint stain at band face join, sharp specifics, holdable by law, gentle on the child. The hour closed itself. Sophie placed the black crayon back
With a stag and 3 stars. For now, with a child, a dog, and a father in orange-scented quiet. The truth could be what it was. A sentence taken back from the dark and set where it could no longer tell the girl who she was. The ring would be a map. The words would be a door. And Bruno, steady, breathing, remained what he'd been from the start. The anchor that let the tide turn, without washing the child away. They came at dusk, when kitchens start smelling warm. Agent Elena Park stood on Daniel's porch with Ruiz and an evidence tech carrying a flat gray case. The guardian ad litem, Harris, practical sweater on startling voice, arrived a minute later. Rain had moved off. The world was the color of tin. Daniel opened the door before they could knock. Bruno rose and, without ceremony, took position beside Sophie. The child's hair was damp from a bath. She held her crayon tin like a briefcase. "We'll keep this easy," Park said, slipping covers over her shoes. "May we come in?" The room had made itself neat. A folded quilt on the sofa, 4 mugs on a tray, crackers because simple kindness steadies hands. Daniel had cleared the coffee table's center for drawings. The house held lemon cleaner and apples. Harris crouched to Sophie's height. "We'll look at pictures. If it gets loud inside, you tell me. Bruno and I will go count porch steps." Sophie slid her palm to the place where Bruno's vest ended and left it there. The dog breathed a steady metronome. Ruiz watched the pair and ranked them first. Park set matte 8x10s on the table, timestamps, evidence footer, and a second stack. Sophie's drawings in sleeves, including the 2 Eliza had just scanned under chain of custody lights. "We'll look together," Park said to Daniel, to Harris, then, gently, to Sophie. If we'd rather not say something, we point. All right? Sophie's fingers curled in Bruno's ruff. All right. Park slid out the first scene photo. The swollen door at the bottom of the stairs, paint peeling in tired curls. Then the room itself, high, narrow window, a blade of light, dust visible in it, the concrete seam. With a pencil eraser, not a finger, Ruiz pointed. Window. He placed Sophie. Now it appeared in the margin of an 8x10 like a reluctant witness. There, Park said, your memory put it back. Harris watched Sophie's face the way nurses watch for the smallest change. When the child's eyes went far for a heartbeat, how many blue crayons in your tin, Sophie counted under her breath, returned without anyone needing to say brave. The tech paired each drawing with a photo, photographing the pairings on a small stand, logging time and sleeve number in a low, anchoring voice. You drew the window too narrow for people, Park said to Sophie, admiring, not testing. That's how ours is. It's too high, Sophie said. You have to look like this. She tilted her face. Bruno's ear tilted with her. They left the ring for last. No photo had caught it. Park set Sophie's signet drawing in the center and didn't reach for a match. This is new. New helps. Sophie nudged the ring drawing closer to Bruno, as if such things belonged under a dog's watch. Relief, Daniel found, has a shelf. Ruiz leaned in, making grooves in his mind where shapes go. Oval face, stag's head, 3 stars, Nick on the left, old, not shiny. Face turned inward when leaving. He didn't ask where she'd seen it. Harris nodded. You heard correctly. Park stacked the door atop the room and laid Sophie's first drawing, Bruno with the small breathing pocket at his chest, on top. She didn't show the star. Everyone knew where it lived. Everything your hand remembered, she said to Sophie, matches what our camera saw. That's important. Sometimes my mouth lies to keep me from falling apart, Sophie said, reporting, not ashamed. My hands don't lie as much. No, Park said, they don't. The tech closed her case with a gentle click. I have what I need. Originals stay sealed with the court. Scans go under lock. She looked at Sophie as if the girl might grade her. We'll take good care. Harris stood. That's our hour. Porch steps? Sophie looked to Daniel. He nodded. I'll be right here. Count 1 for me. She rose, patting Bruno once. The dog watched her go and settled, the unshowy geometry of guardianship. The door clicked. Park let herself look directly at Daniel. What she gave us lines up with restricted points, she said, down to the hook. She tapped the ring drawing with a knuckle, as if asking permission from something you can't see. This emblem is fresh. We'll run it, societies, schools, lodges, family crests, quietly. What happens next? Daniel asked, palms open on his knees. Better than offices. She sleeps better when Bruno's in the hall, Daniel said. So do I, Park said, and meant it. Outside. 7, 8. A child turning steps into a spell. Harris. I always forget 9. Will you save it for me? Sophie laughed, a quick sparrow sound that tilted the room toward Mercy. When they came back in, Bruno stood and let his collar bell the evening once. It sounded like what it was, small, sure, calling the day to order.
The pictures had spoken loudly enough. The rest, quiet, careful, would follow. The field office after hours breathed in its own way, ventilation with a pulse, a distant stapler, keys under tired hands. Park stood by a rolling whiteboard turned shoreline. Photocopies of Sophie's drawings in sleeves. Crime scene stills in careful grids. In the center, a blow-up of the ring drawing. Oval face, stag, 3 small stars. Someone had traced it in pencil so it could be seen from the farthest desk. Above it, Ruiz had blocked in, stag +3. Run it everywhere we own, Park said. Court filings, gala photos, fraternity archives, foundation seals, jeweler catalogs, lodges, the public web. Note the habit, face turned inward, Nick on the left. Carter, the analyst who made the internet behave, raised a hand without looking away. Image match live, filtering heraldic stags with tri-stars, lots of deer heads and hotel logos, 10 minutes. Ruiz, push on shells we parked after the raid, Tri-Star Holdings, Northlight Properties, names that sound like insurance and rivers. Do it, Park said. Name coincidences get my attention. Down the hall, Bruno waited with Daniel in a quiet room because some truths stand steadier when the right heartbeat is close. Squares populated Carter's screen. Crests, logos, rings on hands that had shaken more hands. Okay, she murmured. Private Foundation, Staghaven. Emblem, stag under 3 stars. Not a perfect match branding, but the bones are there. Founder, Roderick Ames. Ruiz straightened. Ames Industrial, real estate, timber, private equity? Same, Carter said. And, look. A gala candid filled the monitor. Tuxes, a woman in green laughing off camera. Bottom right, a moving hand, ring catching light. Oval face, stag, 3 stars, Nick on the left. Park leaned until her breath fogged glass. Zoom, pixels held. The stag lifted. Stars arched. The Nick sharpened. In other frames, the same hand turned the face inward. A habit, a tell. Who's he talking to? Ruiz asked. Caption. Raid. She looked up, apology already there. Markham, your ex-wife's maiden name. The air changed a degree, like a house when a window opens. Ruiz's jaw worked once. Harbor Bridge is Ames, or Ames is behind it. His name isn't on Harbor Bridge's board, Carter said, but addresses rhyme. The treasurer used to be Staghaven staff. Money flows downhill. No one says conspiracy, Park said. Not here. Not yet. She tapped the ring on the screen. We say emblem, habit of turning the face in, a funding path, intersecting a family law case where a child's history includes details only a sealed file had. We say proximity. TriStar switched managers 6 times in 20 months, Ruiz said. Registered agent for TriStar also handled Northlight, Carter added. Northlight's old advisors page, cached, lists Ames, strategic partner. Park let pieces meet without force. Her eyes went to the whiteboard corner where Sophie's ring drawing was clipped beside the cellar door. One child's hand, one man's hand. She didn't need to say which one mattered. Run bespoke signets in jeweler datasets, she said. If it's a club ring, we want a roster. If it's family, we want a tree. Lists filled the screen, guild registries, high-end catalogs, archived society pages. Defunct private dining club, Carter said. The Stag and Stars. Shuttered 5 years back after financial irregularities. Members moved to Staghaven. crest near identical, refreshed. Way Back Cash has a roster. Ames chaired the final banquet. Any Markhams? Ruiz asked. No member by that name, Carter said. But a Harbor Bridge fundraiser lists Lorraine Markham, your ex-mother-in-law, on the host committee. Donor roll shows anonymous at 6 figures. Receipt ID matches a Staghaven disbursement the month prior. Call the Guardian, Park said. Loop Harris and the judge. Document discovery chain. Wall off family law overlap before anyone claims we're using custody to make a criminal case. Surgeons, not lumberjacks. While Ruiz dialed, Carter drew a clean map. Stag and Stars, Staghaven, Harbor Bridge, a docket that still smelled like lemon cleaner and tea at Daniel's table, then a dotted line to TriStar. The 3 stars above the Stag had become a compass. Park went down the hall. Bruno lifted his head before she touched the handle, as if he'd counted her steps. We found a match to the emblem, she told Daniel, voice kept where ropes hold. A crest tied to a club, then a foundation run by Roderick Ames. Through a second fund, his money appears to have covered some costs. And you won't be about your divorce. It will be about a child who remembered what the law forgot. Bruno's ears went forward, then easy again. What do you need? Daniel asked. Memories without embroidery, Park said. Ames near the raid. What he liked to show off. Did you ever see a ring? Daniel searched his own body for a file. He turned his left hand in when he talked, he said, palm toward himself. I thought nerves or golf. He half smiled. I wasn't looking for stars. We are, Park said. Carefully. Back in the bullpen, Carter pulled a chamber luncheon still. Ames at a podium, signet turned inward, the nick catching light. Ruiz drew a thin underline under Ames. Not thick, not circled. A promise to return when the room was quiet. We move, Park said, capping the marker. We don't run. We're not chasing him into the dark. We're widening the light. Night gathered at the courthouse like paper at a desk. Quiet, then all at once. Judge Matthews' chambers held lamplight warm on tea-colored wood. Sophie's first drawing lay under glass like a candle. Beside it, affidavits with blue-backed exhibits, a thin folder with a printout of the ring, Stag, 3 stars, Nick penciled on the left edge. Park stood a pace back, voice leveled to the room's heartbeat. Ruiz sat right, notepad squared. AUSA Whitaker leaned in, Harris near the door, Bailiff Delaney holding the threshold like an oath. We're asking for multiple warrants, Park said. Narrow scope, clear nexus, time-sensitive. Matthews read line by line. Agent narrative, chain on drawings, forensic synopsis, canine present, child regulated. New detail, signet emblem consistent with defunct Stag and Stars, successor Staghaven. Funding path, Staghaven, Harbor Bridge, Markham v. Reed costs. Habit in media, ring face turned inward when leaving. You built probable cause on the child's drawings only insofar as they corroborate restricted facts, he said. Yes, Your Honor, Whitaker said. Ring is new, supported independently by photos. Properties, Matthews said. 4 primaries, Ruiz said, sliding a list. Lake House held by Northlight, seasonal, short staff. Downtown office registered to TriStar, same agent. Storage unit paid cash by a Staghaven umbrella shell. Ames's townhouse. We layered with utilities, cards, travel. No knock at the residence, Park said. We request night service for storage and office. Risk of destruction once we move. Scope, he asked. On-site triage only, bag and tag, Park said. We'll seek separate content warrants. Filter team for privilege at the office. Harris. And the child? No exposure, shiny. Park said, giving the phrase its place. He set that phrase where human truth sits beside legal. Knock and announce at residence, he said, thinking aloud. Night service at storage and office. Outbuildings at the lake. Boathouse and workshop, Ruiz said. Include, he said, dotting the margin. His clerk's signal the point would not be lost. Body cams on entries. Pre-post room video. Evidence tech on scene. Staged, Park said. You'll move to seal affidavits and returns, he told Whitaker. Yes, Your Honor, Whitaker said. Safety and integrity. We'll defend it in the morning. Matthews squared the stack with the heel of his hand, turned to templates, blank lines waiting for ink. He signed with the pen that had denied overreach and granted restraint. He initialed where he narrowed scope, barred rummaging and character fishing, added a special master provision for any attorney-client material. He wrote a line that should have been in the template. K9 units authorized for article searches, handlers to maintain logs. He set a time limit on the storage unit. Within 2 hours of first service, no generous window for cleanup crews. He signed. Delaney stepped forward with the ledger. Warrants in, warrants out. 4 small thunderheads on paper. Seal, Matthews said. The stamp made the precise noise of a promise kept. You may tell the child, he said to Harris, that grown-ups will search places to help the truth move faster, nothing more. She'll ask if Bruno's going, Harris said. He is, Park said, before softening the tone. At one sight. Matthews let a small smile pass. Tell her yes. Papers were gathered like a sleeping child. Park 2, Ruiz 2, Whitaker, a set for morning. The room felt briefly like a chapel. Small vows made, big work ahead. Hands off the custody file, unless I say, Matthews told Park. Hands on the criminal facts without apology. Clear? Clear, she said. He closed his palm over the glass on a crayon dog and an uncolored star. This opened the door, he said. We go through carefully. They turned to the hall. Daniel waited on the bench, shoulders square, hands open, the posture of a man ready to carry what comes back. The dog sat with him, eyes on the hinge, having already counted steps none of them knew they'd taken. We'll advise as we serve, Park said at the door. I'll be here, Matthews said. Some nights the robe stays on till dawn. They went. Delaney held somewhere down the hall. A child would sleep with a dog in the doorway and dream, if she dreamed at all, of a stripe of light made wider. They rolled up the gravel lane in 2 unmarked SUVs and a county truck with a magnetized logo, the kind of convoy that hopes not to be seen, but plans in case it is. Dawn hovered undecided. Mist skimmed the fields. The fence-lined trees kept the night like a secret. Agent Park checked her watch and the warrant packet tucked in her vest. Ruiz raised 2 fingers, and the vehicles eased to a stop by a rusted mailbox that had forgotten how to carry good news. Engines ticked, zippers whispered. Body cams green, Park said. Green, Ruiz replied. Delaney's got the warrant service on video. Daniel slipped the harness over Bruno's shoulders. Leather, dark with dew, buckles whispering, the vest settling across the dog's chest and hiding the pale stitched star that had led more than one person out of a bad night. Daniel checked D-ring, line, quick release twice, the way you do when you love something that might have to be brave. Track to shed or basement entry, Park said. Soft, for the man who translated dog into work. Articles, if he gives the behavior. Daniel's eyes pared down to steady. Bruno, find. The shepherd's head dropped, the world changed shape. He sampled air like a reader, tests a used book's spine, looking for where hands had been. 3 steps, a leftward reorient, an ear flick, a correction. The line came alive in Daniel's hand, more current than tug. The team moved. They passed a 2-story farmhouse with a new roof and an old porch. A kitchen light burned like a promise someone forgot to keep. The main drive split into wheel tracks toward the low country where the ground held water too long. A weathered sign warned about dogs. Bruno ignored it. A state K9 team peeled off to grid the outbuildings and tree line. Perimeter set, a voice murmured in Park's shoulder mic. No movement, no vehicles last hour. Park, copy, let's keep it that way. At the pasture gate, a newly replaced but unoiled padlock squealed. Delaney swung it open with the useful man tilt of his shoulder. Boots printed damp grass. Radios low. Bodies easy in that trained way where noise would be the mistake. As they rounded the second barn, long, low, corrugated sides rusted like lichen, Bruno's pull hardened. Daniel felt the change in his own bones. The tail leveled, the breath shortened into the cadence he saved, thin lip of dark. Bruno planted at the threshold. He nosed the bottom edge, the jam, then lifted his head and pulled. Into the door, body saying, "Here." Pause set and reset, impatient inside restraint. The small bell under his collar chimed once and hushed. "Behavior?" Park asked. "Focused," Daniel said. "Door seam, air from under. He's got something." "Hold the line," Ruiz said, palm on the wood to feel whether it breathed. It did. Slow inhalation of a space that remembers bodies. Park slid to the hinge side, nodded to the bolt cutter man. "On my count. Delaney, announcement." Delaney stepped forward, laminated warrant in one hand, tone firm without cruelty. "Sheriff's Office and FBI, search warrant. If anyone's inside, make yourself known." He waited 3 beats. Wind answered. "We're coming in. 3, 2, 1. Metal parted like bone under a careful blade. The chain clattered. The lock dropped bright into weeds. The door stuck along the damp, swollen bottom. "Bar," Ruiz said. They pried. The seam opened a breath, then another. Cool, old, oiled air washed through, a smell like something that had remembered itself too well for too long. Bruno whined once, not complaint, a request for the people to keep up with what the dog already knew. "Breach." The spreader walked leverage up the frame. Wood hummed, the same Sophie had once imitated. Then side open. Dust lifted and hung in headlamp cones. Beams swept low, then high. No theatrics, just eyes doing work. "Clear the threshold," Ruiz murmured. "Watch your feet." Daniel tapped the vest, 2 fingers, with me. They stepped into old water and machine breath. The shed was 10 by 12 maybe, but sat on ground that had been persuaded into a shape it hadn't chosen. A trap door wore a new ring bolt. Sawdust stitched the seams like pale scars. "Hold," Park said, palm up. "Let me see it before we open it." Her light skimmed slow, a lone peg on the wall with nothing hanging. On a bench, a clean rectangle where a toolbox had lived, the dust darker around absence. In a corner, a coil of rope, old habit, new trick. She tasted metal and refused to name it. Ruiz crouched at the trapdoor. New hardware. Someone's visited. Tech, Park called, and the evidence tech entered with the careful prayer of hands, photos, angles, a little ruler to give the future a scale. The rest of the team held the air steady. Delaney in the doorway listened to the world. The other canine team crackled. Barnes cold on heat, perimeter good. Copy, he said, watching the muscle under Bruno's flank, the clean line of a dog deciding the room about to matter. Sophie drew it with a window, someone whispered. Doesn't happen by accident. On you, Agent, Ruiz said. Lift, Park answered. The bolt gave with the sound of a stubborn jar finally releasing. Earth exhaled, cool, old, edged with oil. Dust wheeled in their light. Park's gloved hand hovered over the opening, as if introducing light to dark. Then she nodded. Camera rolling, the tech said. Wooden steps dropped into a square cut out of ground and secrecy. Daniel sent his beam first, not his boots. Bruno pressed forward, waiting for the "with me" signal. They moved, heel, toe, quiet. Small room, their breathing multiplied by walls shored with old railroad ties. Tamped dirt floor. Against the far wall, a work table made of sawhorses and a door laid flat. On it sat the red rectangle from memory and rumor. The toolbox was there, red enamel chipped along the lip, handle darkened by hands that didn't wash. It sat neither hidden nor displayed, as if the room believed order absolved intention. Beside it lay chain, lengths arranged in those patient, exact ovals. You could feel the pauses between loops, the breath of someone who needs cruelty to look like craft. Silence held for 3 beats. Old position, Park said. No one, crowd. Tech first look. The tech circled like a blessing, corners before contents, mapping before entering. She dusted the handle lightly to read, not lift. Powder bloomed gray, then darker over where fingers liked to land. Bruno's head slid left, right, then fixed. A low vibration moved through him. Attention hardened into shape. Daniel gave him room. Show me, he breathed. Bruno stepped to a deeper shadowed corner, nosed the baseboard and dirt, then looked back and placed one paw, soft, deliberate, on a low wooden crate with a lid not quite seated. He brought his muzzle back and went still. Alert, Daniel said, for the camera. Park knelt. Light skimmed the crate's edge, nailhead polished, a splinter along an old seam. The tech circled with the lens, then Ruiz levered the lid a fraction. Air lifted, mothballs and laundry soap, a cleanness too purposeful to be innocent. Inside, tidy things that had no business being tidy. A chipped barrette, a charm bracelet with 3 empty links, and 1 tarnished heart. A small sneaker printed with clouds. A wallet-sized school photo, corners curled. A boy's stare, taught early. Each item rested in a quart bag, as if someone understood evidence and misunderstood reverence. Marker 1, the tech said at the crate. 2 at the chain. 3 at the toolbox. Ruiz wrote for the record, voice tired of itself even as it did its job. Personal effects consist away from the neatness, as if someone had meant to put it with the rest and couldn't make the hand let go. Pale. The tech photographed from 4 directions. Bag, Park said. The tech lifted the corner with tweezers, slid the rest into a breathing paper sack. The color showed as the bag opened. Soft yellow, a thin blue ribbon along the hem. Faded, but the blue still held enough courage to stop Daniel's breath. He'd never touched the dress, only read the early report. Kept back detail, pale yellow dress with blue binding, size 5'6", hand-stitched name tag removed. He'd carried the line like a sharp coin under his ribs. Now here it was, folded the way mothers fold for Sunday, not the way men fold in haste. "Sophie," Ruiz whispered, not meaning to. Park wouldn't let names run the room. Names are doors. "Document," she said, and the tech wrote, "Child's dress, yellow with blue trim, recovered behind work table, packaged paper, no additional handling." They moved left to right, the way you read or pray. A cubby yielded a bag of keys, some tagged with masking tape dates, some bare. Photographed, bagged, numbered. A nail where a padlock usually slept, powder raised a partial, lifted to a card. On the dirt under the table, faint arcs where shoes pivoted without stepping, dress soles, rubber worn smooth. The tech poured dental stone into an impression with the steadiness of a person pouring batter. "Chain links," Ruiz noted. The tech measured diameters, lengths. 17 inches per loop, consistent with prior description. Minimal corrosion, likely wiped. Wiping that believes cleanliness is forgiveness. Bruno worked the perimeter, nose low, then high, sampling air, wood, the place's skin tells. At the foot of the table he froze, pointing with his whole body. Daniel followed his gaze. On the table, a scatter of screws, a cheap tape measure, a flathead driver with a heat-mottled handle, a ring of dried coffee stained into the door wood. In that ring, a hair, too long for a beard, caught in a splinter. The tech lifted it with a tiny brush. Human hair, long, bagging. No photos on the walls, no performative trophies, function and silence. And yet the room told on its maker. The neatness, the half-remade habits, the red box, the chain. "Latents?" Park asked. "Plenty," the tech said. "Clear ridge detail underside of handle and latch. Better pulls topside. It's humid down here." Delaney stood half in, half out, holding the doorway like a man who remembers manners. "You're getting this?" A body can give without asking for anything. Daniel found the old metronome of the dog's breathing. Work has a rhythm, so does mercy. "Bag the crate and contents intact," Park ordered. 2 clean pairs of hands slid the box into a larger paper sack, like a baptism that meant something this time. Toolbox last. Before they climbed out, Park swept the room once more. Her bean caught the empty peg above the work table, the faint rectangle of cleaner wood it had shaded. "What lived there?" Ruiz asked. "Something with weight and purpose," Park said. "It's gone." "Or on his hand," Delaney murmured, thinking of a screen grab, an inward turn, a crescent nick. He didn't say the word. The room had said enough. They came up into air that felt wider. The mist pulled back to the fence line. Birds decided the day could be trusted. Park passed the sack with the dress to the tech like carrying a sleeping child. Chain rattled once in its bag. A bad memory told to wait. "Report the find to Chambers," Park said. "Guardian gets the heads up, gentle. No details to the parents yet. We lead with safety, then fact." Delaney keyed his mic. "Evidence located. Package 1, toolbox. 2, chain. 3, personal effects, multiple. 4, child's dress, yellow-blue trim. Scene continues." No applause, only the quiet that honors what you hope never to find, and the way it still insists on being found. Bruno shook once, a ripple from neck to tail, stepping out of a river. Daniel wiped a line of dirt from the dog's cheek and left the rest where it belonged. The work wasn't finished, but the room had given back something it owed. Somewhere under paper stars, a child's night might release one more page. The field office lab had its own weather, cool, dry, a hum like concentration turned into sound. Under a hood, the red toolbox sat dulled by powder dusting its handle and latch. Gabrielle, steady hands, quiet shoes, lifted 5 good latents from undersides where fingers like strength. She set them on white cards and dated the corners like recipe notes from a gentler world. Across the bench, Carter leaned toward Aphis, screen light hollowing her face. Ridges and valleys appeared, the topography of a stranger's touch. She mapped minutiae, bifurcation, ridge ending, island. Her left hand worried a cold coffee cup. The room smelled faintly of acetone and paper towel. Ruiz watched like a man watches a surgeon working on his brother. Park kept stillness like a prayer. "Ready," Carter said, and tapped enter. The machine breathed and looked for matches. First returns were nonsense, workman prints, a protest clerk, a hazmat driver 2 states over. Carter refined age, geography, the peculiar distance between 2 forks over the ulnar loop then crime. Civil card. She pulled the header. Private security credential, she read. Sponsor, Stag Haven Trust. The name beneath belonged to a man with a townhouse, a lake house, and a smile he turned on like a stage light. Roderick Ames, Carter said. The lab hum dropped a note. Confirm, Park answered, the rhythm of work, saving you from yourself. Split screen, latent on the left, underside of toolbox handle, known on the right, left index, clean as guilty weather. Carter placed points, tiny pins, stitching one life to another. 1, 2, 3. At 12, Ruiz's pencil stopped tapping. At 16, the tech exhaled as if a roof had come off her ribs. 16 matching minutia, Carter said, small and sure. Ridge flow agreement. Unique scar cut through distal ridge, here, mirrored in the latent. This is him. No cheers. Park nodded once, a solemn yes to truth. Add the chain. Gabrielle lifted the partial from the loop nearest the start of those ovals, where a hand pinched and smoothed. Not as pretty, chain is a bad canvas, but 4 of the same features sat where they should, the scar making its stubborn notch. Present, consistent, repeated, Carter said. Same guy. Ruiz closed his notebook and stared at the red rectangle, then the paper sack with its folded pane, then Bruno, lighthouse, while he thought about a paw on a crate and humans earning their badges. Park phoned Chambers. The bailiff patched her through. Judge, she said, gentle with the fact, we have a 16-point match from the shed toolbox to Ames's left index on a civil credential. Secondary partials consistent on chain. Certified prints to your clerk under seal. This is weight. Judge Matthews asked 2 questions, chain and contamination. Park answered with hours, names, and the map of who had touched what and how. When the call ended, the air changed shape again. The way a kitchen settles after the thing waiting in the ceiling is finally said. Whitaker arrived with 2 files and the long look of a man who must turn proof into a story strangers can trust. He studied the side-by-sides. We can charge, he said quietly. We can stand on this. We can arrest, Ruiz added. We can do a lot, Park said. What we can't do yet is tell a jury why a child didn't speak for 3 years and why she speaks now. The toolbox puts him in the room. The ring puts his hand in motion. The chain tells us he liked order. But the heart, the sticking door, the stripe of light, lives where the law can't go without her. Down the hall, Daniel appeared without summons, obeying the kind of attention dogs teach men. Bruno walked at heel and then not, ears forward, testing the corridor as if truth had a scent. Agent, Daniel said, catching the rest of the question before it escaped. Parked and by clean ink. The red box. The paper sack with its careful fold. Bruno, sitting with the patience of a lighthouse. What happens next, he asked evenly. Warrant for Ames. Whitaker said. Search returns to the grand jury by morning. Motions to seal to protect Sophie. Comfort plan tonight. She doesn't like the big room, Daniel said. She likes Bruno. Harris slipped in from downstairs. The judge can allow support. A screen, a smaller room, recorded testimony with counsel present. We won't drag her through a door she isn't ready to open. She looked at Bruno and smiled like someone who'd decided long ago and never found a reason to change. And yes, Bruno can sit where she can see his chest. That's where courage lives. Ruess wrote in a margin, almost to himself, airtight if child. He hated the sentence and left it. The printer stuttered out glossy ridge details, the crescent scar circled in non-adversarial ink. Gabrielle signed lift cards, Carter laddered the chain of custody. Park closed her eyes for half a second and let the hum settle into steadiness. Delaney, she called, prep the arrest packet. No media, no perp walk, quiet door, quiet car. On it, he said. Some days your job is to keep the room from forgetting its manners. Daniel crouched and rested a hand at the edge of the vest. Bruno lifted into the space. The dog's breath made a tide in Daniel's wrist. For a moment the lab was only this, a red box, a line of ink that meant a hand, a folded dress, a dog who had found people in the dark and then found them again in daylight, patiently, without triumph. Tell me where to put my feet, Daniel said when he stood. Here, Park answered, next to her. When the big door opens, we'll make sure she can see his chest. We'll let the star do its work. No one said victory. The case had tied its knots. Ring, room, chain, print. The toolbox had given up its owner like a long-kept secret, tired of its weight. Enough to bring a man in and keep in there. Not enough to teach 12 strangers what a stripe of light means, until a child, or her careful recording, says it out loud. Evening leaned against the windows. Somewhere, a copier drifted toward sleep. Park gathered the glossy sheets, the lift cards, the quiet courage of a thin stack of paper, and slid them into a plain folder. She wrote one word on the tab, Ames. Then she looked down the hall toward the room that smelled of orange peel and crayons, where a small person waited, and a dog who did not understand due process understood doors. Let's go tell the judge, she said, and the lab's hum went on, steady.
Look kinder. On the far wall, an easel waited with a blank pad, present but not demanding. Bruno took his place by agreement, not command, lying where Sophie could see his chest without twisting, forepaws crossed, a quiet lighthouse. His collar gave one polite chime as he settled. Outside the door, Daniel set his palms on his knees, the posture that said the part he could do, he would. Be near, be still. Whitaker, sleeves rolled and tie loosened an inch out of respect for children, sat low, not behind a desk. Harris, the guardian ad litem, leaned back to make room for air. Eliza, the child psychologist, knelt to Sophie's eye level, and then moved aside to let the room arrange itself around the smallest person there. Hi, Sophie, Whitaker said in a steady, unsweet voice, the kind you use for a skittish horse. I'm Mr. Whitaker. My job is to ask questions. Your job is to tell the truth and say, I don't know if you don't. We're just practicing. Bruno's our audience, all right? Sophie glanced at the dog and back, translating. He's good at listening. I've noticed. Whitaker lifted 2 cards from a folder. One green, one red. Game first. Green means true. Red means not true. I'll say silly things. You pick the card. Sophie's mouth tugged toward a smile. Grass is purple. She held up red. Dogs, meow, red. Rain is wet, green.
You have to answer every question even if it hurts. Her hand hovered, then chose neither card. Bruno's ear ticked. His breathing drew a visible line. Sophie watched his chest lift, then opened her palm and lowered it to her knee, a mothwing gesture. Anchor, she whispered. Bruno slid a shoulder closer. The room steadied. You don't have to answer a question that hurts, Whitaker said. You can ask for a break, drink water, say I need Bruno, I don't know, is the truth too. Sophie nodded and raised green, small but certain. Good. He set the cards aside. We'll practice easy questions, then harder ones. Remember, I don't need you to be a hero. You already did the brave thing when you told the truth the first time. She pushed sleeves past her knuckles. Okay, what's your name? Sophie Reed. How old? 6. What grade? First. The hard reading group. She blinked. Surprised, she'd added that. It felt good. Do you know Bruno? Her hand found the place where a vest would end. Today he wasn't wearing it. Her fingers rested on warm fur, locating the small constellation by feel. He's my forever hero, she said, as if it were a title you keep. Whitaker didn't write it down. He let it land. How do you ask Bruno to be closer? Sophie opened her hand and lowered it. Anchor, perfect. He looked, drew a breath to the rhythm of Bruno's chest. 1, 2, 1, 2. What did you see first when the door opened? Her eyes went to the blank pad, then the tin. Harris slid the tin toward her with a finger. Hands can go first, she said. Sophie chose white, gray, brown, drawing a window out of negative space, shading around it so the light could live. She drew a heavy door with a seam down one side and kept the 5 child-true strokes for the star for later. A stripe, she said. The door made a hum. The stripe of light lived there. She touched the line, like this. What did you hear? Whitaker asked. She swallowed, palm pressed to Bruno's chest. His breath answered her hand. Boots, she said. Water falling off them, making dark on the floor. Any words? Her mouth tightened, corralling something. She looked at Bruno, then the water glass. Can I drink? Please, Whitaker said, grateful to be told how to help. She drank, counted with Bruno. He said, You're mine until I say so, she whispered. But I wasn't. She surprised herself with the last part and studied her hands as if they'd taught her something. Thank you, Whitaker said. He didn't ask for more. He made a small note. Owns sentence. Adds agency. Do you remember his hand? She took black and drew an oval ring face, a stag, 3 stars. She added the nick without thinking, then paused, both proud and afraid of her accuracy. He turned it around when he left. That's enough, Whitaker said gently. If the judge asks questions, I'll be there. You can ask to see Bruno's chest, ask for water. If I say, can you tell me more, you can also say, not now. That's a complete sentence. She nodded. The room's corners softened. Let's pretend I'm the judge, he said carefully. Sophie, do you promise to tell the truth? I promise. And I promise to say, I don't know when I don't. Best oath I've heard in years, he said. Elisa moved to the easel. Want to practice leaving the room, she asked. Sometimes leaving is the hardest part. Why? Because your body thinks the world stops breathing when you stop talking, Elisa said. We teach it the world keeps breathing. Bruno helps. They stood. Bruno rose with Sophie, aligning his body to her steps. Elisa cracked the door and closed it again. Sophie's shoulders lifted. Bruno bumped her knees so slightly you could miss it. She rested her hand on his skull. We heard it together, she murmured. Harris checked her watch and didn't mention time. One more run, she asked. Just one, Whitaker said. Sophie, how do you know you're safe now? She didn't look at the adults.
She looked at the dog. Whitaker said, "You can say, 'I need a minute.' Look at Bruno's chest. Touch your star." He tapped his sternum. "No hurry." "Can I draw if I need to?" "You can hold a crayon," Harris said. "If you draw, that's fine. The judge will understand." "Okay," she said, trying on the word. They packed very little. The tin, one sheet with a stripe of light in white, a cloth for Bruno he would ignore. Elisa pocketed orange oil in case the air needed help. Whitaker closed his folder and left the green and red cards behind. Lesson learned. At the door, Sophie paused. "Will there be the bell?" she asked. "Bruno's collar?" "You'll hear it once," Harris said. "It will be enough." Sophie pressed her palm into the fur map her body knew. Bruno breathed in, out, the tide that had taught her another way to count. She looked up at Whitaker and nodded, small and sure. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she said honestly. Then, "But I can go." "That's courage," he said. They stepped into the quiet hallway, child, dog, and a small procession of adults who had chosen to be humble tools. Bruno's collar gave one soft chime, a promise the morning could carry. By the time the extra water carafe was wheeled in and a small blue cloth draped over the witness chair, the old custody courtroom had learned a different gravity. The gallery benches shone from years of best clothes. A new rail gave the jury a view without making the child a spectacle. The seal above the bench seemed steadied by a hand. Judge Matthews took the bench as if Wood could feel shame and needed steadiness. He reviewed orders, support person permitted, therapy dog permitted, screen allowed for entrances, and set them down like a sleeping infant. "Counsel," he said, voice carrying without push. "We resume People v. Ames. The child witness will testify with accommodations. The court's interest remains her safety and the truth. All will conduct themselves accordingly." A murmur rose and sat when the bailiff cleared his throat. The jury looked like people told they'd be trusted with something that would change the way they wore their names. On the aisle, Daniel rounded his shoulders an inch to make space. Hands open on knees, he measured the short path from chambers to the box, the ordinary math of a Father's Day. Steps, breaths, distance to the dog. Bruno waited at his heel, vest off by order, bell quiet as a held promise. He'd memorized the room, the draft under the doors, the scuffed rail where rings tapped, the fluorescent hum that could bother. Signal. Open, lower, breathe. "Anchor," she whispered, and Bruno leaned into the leashless space, making a gravity the world couldn't argue with. The room adjusted, heads dipped. Someone's pen rolled and thought better of it. Park stood near the back with Ruiz, hands folded, the posture that admits you aren't the story. Whitaker rose and shut his file like a chapel door. "Good morning, Miss Sophie," Matthews said, the mist doing its old work of making small people taller. "The bailiff will guide you to the witness chair. Bruno may accompany you and lie where you can see him." Delaney held the rail. Sophie walked with the dog. Not a parade, just two beings going where their work would be. The screen blocked a slice of the gallery, but not the jury. She climbed the step with the measured care of a child who has counted stairs by breath. Bruno settled, angled to face her. The star under fur lived where it always did, unseen, and enough. "Raise your right hand," Delaney said, softer than the script. Sophie glanced at Harris, then Bruno's chest. She raised her hand, crayon and all.
The oath came in the simple version. Tell the truth and say, "I don't know," when you don't. "I promise," she said, "and I will say, I don't know." The clerk left the mic an inch low. No child should bow to a machine to be heard. Harris sat left, not quite touching. Bruno's collar chimed once, then fell into long listening. Whitaker stood only as far as the line the judge had set, the distance that said the room was trusted more than feet. "Good morning, Sophie. Do you see Bruno?" Her hand drifted to where a vest would end. "Yes." "Is he helping you breathe?" She nodded. "He breathes slow." "So may we," he said, and several jurors did without knowing they'd been invited. He kept the first minutes on ground she had paved in smaller rooms. Name, age, first grade. The green and red game wasn't here, but it had taught her where her edge lived. He asked nothing that needed bravery yet, only for the outline of a door and a stripe of light, retrieved from a place daylight rarely visits. "When you're ready," he said, "I'll ask about a door and a stripe of light. If you want me to stop, say stop." "Stop," she tested. The word fit. She counted Bruno's breaths. 1, 2. And the courtroom learned to hold counting. The defense watched with the neutral face lawyers wear when compassion and strategy bump shoulders. Ames sat carefully shaved, expensive remorse arranged on his posture, left hand flat on his thigh. If he wore a ring, the face didn't show. "Miss Sophie," Matthews said before Whitaker continued, "you may hold a crayon while you speak. Draw if you wish. You can see Bruno at any time. There is no hurry in this room." She tested the space, asked what it felt like when the door made its sound. She smoothed imaginary paper across her lap, then nodded. He waited, not to improve the answer, but to prove the room had time to spend on her words. Harris kept her hand still, promising not to rush. "I do," Sophie said at last, carrying a fragile box. She opened her palm and lowered it, then let her gaze brush the jury rail. Ordinary faces. A farmer's tan at a watch line. A teacher, a grandmother, whose hands wanted to fold a blanket and couldn't. None looked away. At counsel table, a child's drawing of a ring lay under a clip, stag and stars inked by insistence. In an adjacent room, a red toolbox waited under muslin. You could feel its weight even when you couldn't see it. Proof sat in tidy stacks, but the case, the thing that made it breathe, had padded to the witness box on quiet pause and settled where a child could put her hand when air went thin. "Before we begin," Whitaker said, glancing at the dog despite himself, "I'm going to ask our listener to listen." Bruno didn't thump his tail or perform. He held steady, ordinary space, and the room fell in around it like a tide. "Proceed," Matthews said. Sophie tightened her fingers once on leather and then relaxed. Daniel watched that small change and let his lungs follow. 2 rows back, his ex-wife pressed a tissue to her nose and looked at her lap. Park crossed her arms, not defensive, only to keep from reaching for something that had to stand alone. "Tell us," Whitaker said, "what you remember about the light." She breathed with Bruno and began, not the hardest part yet, not the sentence that stole her name and was taken back, just the light. How it came high and thin, a promise whispered through a keyhole. How Bruno filled the doorway and waited without hurry. How the world learned to breathe again by copying a dog. When she paused, she wasn't lost. She was practiced at stopping before the edge. She touched the place on her chest where a star might live and nodded to herself. Bruno's collar gave one soft bell, calling the next minute. "The dark place," she said when asked what she called it. "Small." "What made it dark?" "The window is too high. It lets in a stripe, not a room." She tipped her chin to show the angle of survival. What did it smell like? Oil. Wet. Like the mower, but inside. And metal. Like pennies you're not supposed to put in your mouth. Sounds? The door hums when it breathes. She gave the low mmm. Boots make wet noise. They leave dark. She traced ovals in the air, a child returning treads to the world so they could be counted. Did anyone talk to you? Whitaker said. He didn't ask for the voice again. Do you remember his hand? She nodded, shaping an oval and pressing 3 tiny points. A deer with stars. He turned it in when he left. She showed her palm, turning inward. Only when he left. Can you tell us about the day Bruno came? His voice lifted, calling a good dog to the porch. It was like the door was sleeping, she said. Then it woke up and made the noise. The stripe got bigger, but not a lot. She looked at Bruno, choosing the pronoun. Bruno didn't run. He waited. He breathed. I could hear his collar in his vest, a tiny bell in a glove. What did you do? I put my hand where the vest didn't cover. She placed her palm on Bruno's sternum and left it there. The courtroom watched her touch something it couldn't see. On the star. When I touched it, I could walk. Not with my feet, with my breath. Did Bruno pull you? He never pulls, she said, clean devotion in her voice. He waits like the ocean. And you go with him when you can. She flicked a glance toward Daniel, 1 heartbeat, and his open hands closed and opened again like after a prayer. Anything else from that day? The red box, she said, setting the square in the room. And the chain laid like ovals, not a pile. He liked things lined up. There was a hook on the door, high. It didn't have a thing on it. Jurors thought of a photograph they'd half ignored. Across the room, the evidence tech who bagged the dress stared at the floor between her shoes and thought of her grandmother folding laundry on Sundays. Do you see the man who wore the ring in the courtroom today? Sophie didn't look at the defense table. She looked at the judge. I don't want to look at him, she said, not defiance, a weather report. I can say the ring without looking. That's sufficient, Matthews said, before any lawyer could stand. The record will reflect the witness's statement. Do you remember where you were when Bruno found you? Whitaker asked. In the corner, not the door corner, the other one. She curved her hand, outlining a body making itself small. I put my hand out because the stripe showed me where. He put his chest there. Are you safe now? She didn't answer at once. She pressed her hand to her sternum, mapping a star she couldn't see. Bruno breathes slow, and I can say stop, and the window is high, but it's not here. She patted the rail, solid wood under small fingers, and the door in this room doesn't hum. It should have been too much. It wasn't. The words fit, gentle as a quilt. Whitaker stepped back half a pace. The end. That meant I didn't have words, but my hands had them, and Bruno kept them for me until I could say them out loud. She looked at the ordinary faces. Teacher, farmer, grandmother. Thank you for listening. Defense rose, cleared his throat, and put it down. No questions, he said, surprising himself. Miss Sophie, Matthew said, you may step down. Bruno may accompany you. She didn't hurry. She patted Bruno's head, found the star with her palm one last time, and lifted her chin to meet the narrow lane down from the box. Bruno rose and fell into step, chest forward, the lighthouse moving with the small boat. As they passed Daniel, Sophie's sleeve brushed his hand, and it was enough. In their wake, the room stayed very, very quiet, the way a forest does after first snow. The criminal trial had asked a child to speak, and she had given only what she could carry. It turned out to be exactly what the truth needed. They came at dusk, when kitchens were warm and windows glowed. Agent Elena Park stood on Daniel Reed's porch beside Agent Ruiz and an evidence tech carrying a gray case. Guardian ad litem Harris arrived moments later. Rain had left the air metallic and still. Daniel opened the door before they could knock. Bruno, his German Shepherd partner, took position beside Sophie, the 7-year-old at the center of the custody fight. She clutched her crayon tin like a briefcase. Inside, the living room was tidy, the air scented with lemon cleaner and something sweet. Daniel had set out mugs and crackers, clearing space for Sophie's drawings. Park explained they'd like Sophie to share her artwork. No pressure. Sophie's pencil strokes were deliberate. She drew Bruno with his star-shaped chest marking, then a basement with a red toolbox, chains laid in ovals, and light from a high window. Harris and Park exchanged a look. They recognized the layout from an unsolved kidnapping. Later, Sophie whispered to Bruno, "Thank you for finding me in the dark place." The words froze the room. She was the missing girl Bruno had rescued 2 years earlier, a case never closed. Therapy sessions followed. Sophie, unable to speak details, drew more. Boots dripping dark, a humming metal door, oil smells, and a ring with a stag under 3 stars. The FBI tied it to philanthropist Roderick Ames, whose charities had secretly funded parts of Sophie's mother's legal fight. A rural search brought Bruno to a padlocked shed with a trapdoor. Below lay the red toolbox, chains, and keepsakes from multiple victims. DNA confirmed 2 cold cases. In court, afternoons in the yard, her laughter breaking into places silence once ruled. On the day the verdict came, Daniel took Sophie to the park. She carried her crayon tin. Under an elm, she drew Bruno, not as the dog who saved her, but as the dog who stayed. The FBI later credited the case with advancing child recovery methods by recognizing the evidentiary value of a traumatized child's art. But for Daniel, the milestone wasn't legal. It was the first time Sophie called him Dad. That night, after Sophie fell asleep, Daniel sat with Bruno on the porch. "You found her twice," he said. Bruno leaned against him, eyes reflecting the porch light, quiet, steadfast, unshakable. They came at dusk, when kitchens were warm, windows glowed, and the air still carried the smell of rain. Agent Elena Park stood on Daniel Reed's porch beside her partner, Agent Ruiz, square-shouldered and calm-eyed, and an evidence tech holding a flat gray case. The guardian ad litem Harris arrived moments later, wrapped in a sensible sweater. Daniel opened the door before they could knock. Bruno, his German Shepherd partner, moved to Sophie's side without being told. The 7-year-old's hair was still damp from her bath, and she clutched her tin of crayons like a small briefcase. Inside, the living room was neat without looking staged. A folded quilt rested on the couch. On the coffee table sat a tray with 4 mugs and a plate of crackers, Daniel's way of steadying his hands. It cleared a space for Sophie's drawings. Park crouched to Sophie's level. "Would you like to show us some of your art?" she asked gently. Sophie nodded, her pencil moving with quiet purpose. She drew Bruno first, marking the star-shaped patch on his chest, then a basement, red toolbox, chains laid in ovals, a sliver of light from a high window. Harris and Park traded a glance. They knew that room. It belonged to an unsolved kidnapping. Later, Sophie bent close to Bruno and whispered, "Thank you for finding me in the dark place." The words hit like a hammer. She was the missing child Bruno had rescued 2 years earlier, a case that had never fully closed. In therapy, Sophie's hands told the stories her voice couldn't. She drew boots dripping something dark, a humming metal door, the smell of oil, and a ring engraved with a stag under 3 stars. The FBI traced it to Roderick Ames, a respected philanthropist whose charities had quietly bankrolled parts of Sophie's mother's legal battles. A rural search followed. Bruno led agents to a locked shed and a trap door. Beneath it lay the red toolbox, chains, and memento. Shifted to Daniel. Sophie's life began to grow new roots. Afternoons were spent in the yard, her laughter replacing the silence that once filled the air. On the day the verdict came down, Daniel took Sophie to the park. She carried her crayon tin and sat under an elm, sketching Bruno, not as the dog who saved her, but as the dog who stayed. The FBI credited the case with changing how child recovery work used art from traumatized survivors. But for Daniel, the real victory came the first time Sophie called him Dad. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Daniel sat with Bruno on the porch. "You found her twice," he murmured. Bruno leaned against him, eyes steady in the porch light, loyal, constant, and unshakable. In the end, this is a simple story about love, the kind a good dog carries without fanfare. German Shepherds have a way of standing steady for us, ears up, hearts open, asking for nothing but a place by our side. Bruno's quiet loyalty reminds us that the bond between a person and a dog can hold more weight than we ever say out loud. It steadies grief, softens fear, and turns ordinary days into safe harbors. If watching this stirred something in you, and you'd like to deepen your own rhythm with your dog, I'm happy to point you to a gentle, no-nonsense resource I trust. Nothing salesy, just clear, kind guidance that respects both you and your pup. If that sounds useful, tell me share the resource, and I'll pass it along whenever you're ready. Take your time. Give your dog an extra ear scratch tonight. And if you want a hand strengthening that bond, I'm here. Like a neighbor who loves dogs as much as you do.